On this bonus edition of The Thriller Zone, please welcome Alisa Valdes, author of Hollow Beasts.
We got some hollow beasts to talk about, but I also want to talk about a hella guest. That's you.
Thank you.
Yes. By the way, I love this cover.
Isn't it amazing? The colors.
Yeah. It's sexy, it's hot, it's mysterious, and all that. But first, I want to do this. And I want to thank you for your patience. We had to blow you off for a week because we had this month has just been stacked with New York Times bestsellers back to back. I mean,
I've seen that. That's remarkable. You've got some heavy hitters on here.
Yes, I'm very blessed. It's been a wicked great time. Now, there's so many things I want to talk about, and I would ordinarily really put you on the spot because I'm really famous for putting people on the spot because I'm a former radio guy. So our thing was when you wake up in the morning and you flip on your coffee maker and then you flip on your radio and you hear people doing crazy things where people are on the spot. That was me back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I would ordinarily, I know you're looking at me going, what? That can't
70s? Be. No. You had to have been like 2.
Okay, I think I love you. But I was going to put you on the spot and say, break out the saxophone, because I wanted to hear just an...
Wait.
Is it right? Is that it's right there? Oh, good. Okay, cool.
I'm not going to play it, but...
Why not?
It's there. Oh, it doesn't have a reed on it, and it just would look weird. Nobody looks good playing the saxophone. Really. I mean...
Okay. Well, if you know,
except Mindy Abear, she looks great playing the saxophone.
Okay. Well, I was thinking you're not going to pull a Dizzy Gillespie.
You never know.
All right. Well.
Yeah, folks. I would have if I knew you wanted me to, but I don't have reeds on it. I have to get up and go get the reeds. But it's right there. You
know what we'll do? We'll have you back with your follow-up bestseller.
Yay! Blood Mountain. Blood Mountain's out next year, so.
Okay, well, we'll do that, and we'll talk about your saxophone. But because you majored in jazz performance.
I did. Yeah, I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston and majored in performance on the tenor saxophone, jazz, yeah.
That's crazy. You have you have a really wicked variety of a background. I'm talking like fitness, cooking, jazz, aerobics, teaching, broadcast journalism, and the list goes on. It's crazy.
Print journalism. Yeah, I mean, I'm old, so that's what happens when you're old. Like, your resume gets really long. People are like, how could you do so many things? I'm like, it's taken a really long time. I've evolved, But yeah, so that was back when I was a teenager, and I wrote about my experience at Berklee. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. Even when I was like 9, I was writing my first story. And I like music too. I'm both. And but my experience at Berklee College of Music in the late 80s, early 90s was kind of rough. It was like 85. The student body was 85% male. The teaching staff was 98% male. There were no kind of... It was just a different time. It was like the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill time. And I wrote about how uncomfortable the experience was for me and a bunch of other women at the school. And I sent it to the Boston Globe, blind. And they ran the story. They fact-checked it, and they ran it really big on a Sunday a couple of weeks before graduation. And Bonnie Raitt was our commencement speaker that year. And I remember her handing me my diploma and being like, "You're the girl who wrote that story." And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, it was amazing. It was fantastic. And it doesn't get any better out here for sexism, And I remember at that point thinking, I was about to graduate and go on my first job, which was playing in the Americana Lounge on a Carnival cruise ship, like in a big band for a ventriloquist whose mouth moved. He was drunk. It was like, I could do that for the rest of my life because that's like the level of musician I am. And weddings and God knows what. Or I could do this other thing that made Bonnie Raitt know who I was. So I went to graduate school after a week. After the next year. But I spent a week on the cruise ship, and I'm like, this sucks, man. I was sick all the time. They didn't let the crew above deck. Because I had this idea, cruise ship, fun. No, I was down in the bowels of the ship. I'd creep out at night to play for this weird dude, and
yeah.
Anyway, so I went to grad school for journalism at Columbia Because I'm like, I'd like to do this thing for real. And the Globe hired me. Like, as soon as I graduated, they hired me as the youngest staff writer at the Boston Globe ever. And I got 3 Pulitzer nominations within like the first 5 years. And
What?
Yeah, and before I was 28, I was named like the best essayist, newspaper essayist in the nation. I'm like, I was probably on the wrong path with the music thing. But
You think?
but I write as a musician. It's auditory for me. So when I edit out loud. My writing day's pretty regimented. When you work in journalism, I went to the LA Times after that. I spent about 10 years in journalism. But when you're a newspaper writer, you never get writer's block because
There's no time.
There's no time. And it wasn't an option. Like, you could feel terrible or tired and you don't want to write about the Somerville City Council meeting. Who does? But you do it anyway because you're getting paid to do that. So I try to do that with novels now. So I get up, I write. When I'm not taking my puking dog to the vet, I'll write pretty consistently every morning. And then around 1 or 2, I'll stop, but I record what I've written. Mm-hmm. And then I listen to it as I go for a walk or a hike.
I totally get this, Alisa. I totally get it. Yeah, I really do, because everything to me, ask my wife, everything to me is about sound. Mm-hmm. It's how something sounds. An odd noise can annoy the fuck out of me. There's a certain balance to words that when you hear it, you realize, oh, that really is melodic. That really works. And then when you read it, I'm a big fan of, like you, reading it out loud. Then you'll read it out loud sometimes and go, well, that really sucks. That just sounds horrible. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you learn jazz improvisation on, as a keyboardist or something where you don't have to take breaths.
Right.
They teach you at Berkeley to only play phrases that are as long as an exhale, because the human ear only evolved to take in packets of information as long as that. And then there's always a natural pause because you're breathing in. So my writing is like that. And I remember one of the first kind of criticisms I got when I spoke at a university after the Dirty Girls Social Club came out. It was, someone said, your writing is your sentences are very short and easy to understand, And they're like, is that a problem for you in the world of high letters? And I'm like, it's not a problem for me. Like, I guess it depends on what your goal is as a writer. And mine has always been kind of the journalistic goal, which is communicate clearly with as many people as possible and get out of my own way.
Right.
So, that's kind of how I approach fiction.
And not to make it about anyone else besides you, because you are my star for the next few minutes. But when we were talking with Don Winslow, he was using a very similar thing. He's very much about seeing the page, and I'm an enormous fan of white space, or as some people call negative space. So when I look at a page, I am more comfortable when there are gaps in white space, because I feel like there's a fluidity that makes me feel comfortable. Plus, I know that my eye will move more quickly.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of follows your rhythmic references.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be overwhelmed.
No. Now, I want to, by the way, a quick question, because this has been burning in my head, because Don and I also talked about this. Do you have a favorite saxophonist, whether it's alto, soprano, or whatever? Do you have a favorite hornblower? Who is it?
I do. It's probably someone nobody's ever heard of. He's a Norwegian saxophonist named Jan Garbarek.
Oh, Jan Garbarek, yeah.
Jan. All his work with Keith... oh my gosh, why am
Pat
I forgetting?
Metheny?
Yeah, Pat Metheny. And I love him because he didn't come from there was a lot of pressure to conform at Berkeley, weirdly, to play bebop, to play a million miles an hour, to do it this particular way, to sound like, and I like Michael Brecker too, and Joe Henderson. But Jan Garbarek was like, I'm going to just riff on Norwegian folk music because that's who I am. I'm going to go stand on the edge of a cliff in the fjords and just play to the whales, and I just love it. His work is so emotive,
I don't know if I'm going to feel like a cliche clown right now, but I was thinking that you might have pulled up somebody like, Desmond Getz, Coltrane, Parker,
I
Rollins.
love all those guys.
Yeah.
I do. And we studied them.
Sure.
a great deal. But as far as, I'm not going to say New Mexico and Norway are similar, but I think there is a similar vibe as far as just the vastness of the spaces.
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah. Well, let's transition into this magnificent little book called Hollow Beasts. Now, I've got a few things to talk about, and I'm gonna bring up one right now. It starts with a wicked prologue. There's no giveaways here, but it starts with a wicked prologue. It's disturbing, and it really makes me hate a little piece of humanity. We'll come back to that in a minute. But then it moves on to some odd humor. I was laughing out loud with the Instagrammers in the hot springs. That was friggin' brilliant. I mean, you nailed the dialogue to the wall.
Thank you.
Then that gets complicated with bad men. Again, why is it always bad men? That sucks. But then it ends. Back to my, I'm going to bring up roller coaster. It ends with a reunion of sorts that'll make you smile. So it really kind of has a great full circle, which you don't always get what you want. Thank you, Rollins. No, you don't always get in thrillers,
Yeah. Well, one of my absolute favorite writer, I would say, well, I have two of them, but one's alive and one's dead. The living one is Dean Koontz. Like, I've been a huge Dean Koontz fan my whole life. Like,
I can see that.
College, and I wanted, when I started out in novels 20 years ago, I really wanted to be in thrillers, and somebody who was perceived to be like me, there wasn't a ton of kind of like welcome for that. So I did what was expected or where I seemed to fit. But that's always where my heart's been. And what I love about him is what I love about my favorite dead writer, who is Charles Dickens. And I think they both tell really fully realized emotional stories about complex characters, but it's also social commentary at the same time.
Yeah.
And I often tell people, if you want to know the myths of a time, you look at the journalism, because they'll present things that aren't true as though they're true. So I would imagine in Victorian England, child labor was sort of like no big deal. Well, it's becoming that again here, isn't it? Whereas if you want to know the truths of a time, the emotional truths of a time, you look to the novelists. And I think that's what Dickens does. I think that's what Koontz does. And it's what I was trying to do too. And life is not just one thing. It's not just like good and bad. And I tried to throw some nuance in there. And in all fairness, there's one bad woman in the group of terrorists. But even I wanted to try to show, Marjorie, I wanted to show that she has become what she is just unthinkingly. Like, it just goes along with, bedazzling her jeans from Hobby Lobby. And it doesn't really occur to her that she's doing anything wrong other than... And I wanted to show she was brutalized, too, as a kid. Yeah, but I wanted to introduce some levity to it also.
Yeah.
There was a survey done of the happiest music in the world, which was really interesting. Uh-huh. And it's almost always coming from the saddest or the most painful places. So like the Dominican Republic, with merengue, or even when people say the blues wasn't sad. The blues was a counterpoint to the sorrow. So I try to do that in my book too, to show that there is humor amongst the victims and the people who are oppressed. So even in that prologue, the girls it's some women who are being kept in a hole in the ground in the forest, and they're being hunted.
Yeah.
And one of them is just telling her story over and over to the others in case something happens to her, so they'll know what to tell her mom. But there's one in there who's just like, oh God, shut up.
Yeah.
And I was trying to show the diversity of those girls, that the terrorists have all assumed to be one thing. They're not one thing. And in fact, one of them's kind of mean herself, So, yeah.
But more importantly, let's get into the protagonist, who is Joni Luna. I like this gal. She's sassy. She's straight ahead. Everyone's going to like her. But where did you come up with a game warden for a protagonist? I like that, because I don't think there's a whole lot of stories out there, Alisa, about game wardens.
It's funny. So the idea came to me first, and then I Googled. I'm like, is anyone else writing about game wardens? And that's how I found CJ Box, who I love.
Oh,
He's like going to be the silver medalist right under Kuntz and Dickens. Like, the guy is, like, he's a machine. First of all, he writes so much, but he's so good.
Yeah.
He's just so good. But yeah, I was kind of like, I only read a couple of his books before I started writing, because then I'm like, I don't want to read anymore. I don't want it to influence how I do Jodi. The idea of Jodi came to me, I'm going to be totally honest with you, and it's not super flattering, but I was on a dating site, and I went on a date with a game warden, a dude, and it didn't progress. My mom calls me the queen of the first date because I'm very happy the way I am. Like, if you're not adding something to my life, it's going to be worse. I'm not going to do this. But I always learn something interesting. And he was the one who told me that game warden, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was a forest ranger.
Right.
You know, a lot of people make that mistake. It's not. Game warden is the only cop whose job it is to protect wildlife from people, basically.
Okay.
And they enforce conservation laws. They also teach people to hunt properly. So it's not, and I liked that because it's not, you can protect animals and still be a hunter.
Sure.
And still go fishing. You know, it's not like this. The U.S. is real big on binaries right now. So it's going to be like, here's the hunters, and they're all trophy hunters and horrible posing with a dead giraffe. And then there's PETA and vegans. There's a lot of nuance in the middle. But yeah, he told me that his job was the most dangerous law enforcement job in America. And I'm like, that cannot be true. You're out there in the middle of nowhere. And he's like, look it up. And I did. And sure enough, game wardens are 7 times more likely to be attacked or killed on the job by a suspect than a city cop in, like, the worst urban area.
Well, do you think that's because it's so remote and the chances of getting caught are pretty tough?
I think it's that. It's definitely that, because they can patrol an area that's 5,000 square miles.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
No.
And they don't usually work with partners, so they're by themselves.
Oh, wow.
And in those remote areas, their cell phones don't work. The police radio might not even work in some of those spots. So they have a satellite radio, maybe. And then if you think about who they're up against out there, like, people who have their licenses and they're fishing and hunting properly are not a problem because they do things the right way. But poachers, you got to think of the mindset of a poacher. This is a person who is armed. This is a person who does not care for the law. And this is a person who feels entitled to do whatever they want as long as nobody knows about it. So you put all those things together, and I started thinking, wouldn't it be interesting to be a woman game warden? Because then that adds most poachers are men. So it adds like another element of just danger. And that's what appealed to me. I feel like she's like the most imperiled cop in America in a way. And then I upped the ante, by putting her up against a group of terrorists who doesn't like people they perceive to be like her. Right. So it's all of that.
It was a wicked blend. I mean, it really was. You had yourself, you were rooting for her, and then, of course, you despised the antagonist. And yet, and then there was so much darkness throughout it. But the way you pulled it out at the end by making this reunion, I'm just going to use that one word and stop, made me go, oh, wow. I can't say I did not fully see it coming, but I did not partially see it coming. So when it finally came, it was a very pleasant bonus. And can I be any more nebulous than that? But we need to.
I know we don't want to spoil it, but yeah. I wasn't sure if I was being too obvious about it.
No.
But also, you kind of do want to throw some breadcrumbs so people are like, is she not?
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this quick question, and I want to make sure I stay on this book. However, because I'm not familiar with you until now, I'm looking at your other books, which include Haters, Make 'Em Look Good, Playing with Boys, The Dirty Girls Social Club, Dirty Girls on Top, The Husband Habit, The Three Kings, The Feminist, and The Cowboy. So I'm wondering, how do they relate or are familiar to this kind of a genre? I think this is a debut series, correct? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the debut series. So they're going to not be like this in a lot of ways. However, because there's a and I hope you take this as the compliment that it is. There is a YA feeling sprinkled in here on a couple of places, which really shows itself in that opening scene that's humorous. And I mean, I friggin' loved that scene. It was so hilarious because it's so true of social commentary of what is happening today with content influencers. But back to this, although these different, because you won some huge awards with these books. So how are they similar and or different to this?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, so
we can unpack that by saying, thank you, this is fabulous. But I do want to know, because I want to know what your style is and where it kind of came from. And
Well, my father is a retired professor emeritus of sociology and history. And he raised me mostly. My mom's a poet and uber academic. And he founded the New Mexico history program at the University of New Mexico. And so we used to spend weekends when I was little driving to these little remote towns, kind of like what I write about, and he would tell me the history of them and show me how different groups of people fit together. And the concept of identity as a social construct was always something we talked about, because my dad's an immigrant from the nation of Cuba. He's from Havana, but he came to the U.S. at 15 by himself, and ended up as part of something called the Operation Pedro Pan, where the CIA paid to take 14,000 Cuban kids out of Cuba. It's a long story. But anyway, he ended up in a foster home in Albuquerque and met my mom when they were both 18 at UNM, and they were living next door to each other in these little apartments. And so my mom, meanwhile, is very much New Mexican, kind of like Jodi's family. Her family's been here. We trace our family tree back to the early 1500s here, and but beyond that, that's the Spanish side, and they married into Native American groups that had been here for 10, 20,000 years. So when I got and when I was little, the term Hispanic didn't exist. I was born in 1969. The U.S. Census Bureau creates that label in 1979. So it was always really interesting for me to see how the U.S. was trying to create this monolith where it didn't exist. So later when people are like, what does the Latino community think? I'm like, both of my parents would fit that. And they have nothing in common. It's like, and then to have, also the academic side where we're all talking about this. What is this identity even being created for? What does it mean? So that's what all my books have in common, I think, is sort of an exploration of the complexity of what it is to be Hispanic or Latino in the United States. That it isn't a monolith. So that was kind of my first book, The Dirty Girl Social Club. That's the whole point of that book. So I kind of do that. I write on a couple levels in all of my books. There's the story that I think is fun and interesting. Then there's like this social commentary underneath.
Right.
And I think with all my social commentary, basically, I really don't like labels that are applied to human beings. I think that, race is a social construct. Racism is real. Race is not. We cannot say where one group of people begins and the other ends. So for me, it's kind of like this belief, this American belief in race and ethnicity based on how you look is a religion of sorts. And not one that I believe in. Not
one you want to worship at. Well, then this first of all, I felt like I just went to school and I should get some kind of a degree. But please don't ask me if there's going to be a quiz.
So sorry.
Because I'm not really great with quizzes. So, secondly, this now helps me understand why you came up with that moniker or nickname of the godmother of Chica Lit. I mean that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's so funny because my first book was almost a parody.
Yeah.
Write a Latina term, and I'm like, that will never exist, and here's why. And then to be like this label, and I say it in the book, it's like none of us had anything in common, but except for the fact that someone somewhere thought we had something in common.
Yeah.
And that was enough to bond us. So it can both be something that you embrace and that bonds you to other people, but within the group, you all know that it doesn't really mean anything. Like, we're not that simple. We're not that, easy to predict.
Right.
So I've been towing that kind of fine line to be like, this thing doesn't exactly exist the way you think it does. And then to suddenly have the mainstream media be like, oh, she's the godmother of that thing that she just tried to tell us doesn't exist. I'm like, cool, I think. I don't know.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. We're not going to give you a label, but I just gave you a label because the label fits for me.
Right. And that's the thing about labels. They tend to serve the dominant class.
Yeah.
And someone asked me, do you want to be called a Latina writer or not? And I'm like, it depends on who's saying it. So let's think about being called, a funny Jew by Hitler or being called a funny Jew by Albert Brooks. Like,
right.
What is the intent behind the label? And as a word person, words are fascinating to me because none of them are the things that they represent. So it's this imperfect effort for all of us contained within these bodies, to connect with each other somehow. So, there's a big debate now. Is it Latinx? Is it Hispanic? I'm like, it doesn't matter. Having had parents who speak 2 languages, my dad, fully bilingual now, but I realized early on the word didn't matter. It was the thing that they were trying to say with the word. And in the US, I think we get really hung up on the symbols.
Yeah.
Rather than what the intent behind the symbol is.
Well, how about we just say you're a damn fine writer?
Thank you.
Yeah. How about we just go with that?
I like that. I'm really terrible at almost everything. Like, sincerely, really bad at almost everything.
I don't.
This one thing I'm good at. That's it.
By the way, I'm not buying it. I am going to circle back and hear you blow your horn. I want to hear that. But another time, when you can get your reads in order. But this has been fun, and I appreciate your time. And folks, if you'd like to learn more and read Hollow Beasts, which I would recommend, you might want to go to Alisa-Valdez-Rodriguez.com. And by the way, I did a little digging on you, and I like your little Linktree connection better because I learned all kinds of stuff about you there that I'm not sure that I saw on your website. So
the Linktree's better.
If you want to do that, Linktree/author Alisa. All right, once again, Alisa, this was fabulous fun. Hope the puppy's going to be better, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I apologize for my confusion.
All good.
All right, thank you.
With Momo and Popo.